Hello, in this video we're going to look at factorizing expressions by grouping in pairs. Okay, notice each of these questions, they have 4 terms in each. So questions where you have 4 terms are usually going to be by this method of grouping in pairs. Okay, let's do it. So 2xy take 8xz plus 3wy take 12wz. Factorizing by grouping in pairs says exactly what I said, right? Group them in pairs. Factorize separately. So let's just look at this first 2 terms here. How could I factorize? Well, factorizing means put the highest common factor out the front of a pair of brackets and make sure that it multiplies to give that expression. Okay, now what is the highest common factor of these 2 terms? Look at your normal numbers. What's the highest common factor between 2 and 8? Well, they're both even. I'm going to put it as 2. And then x is also common. I'm going to pull that out the front. So just looking at the first 2 terms, all right? And then y and z, they're not common. So now we can start to put it into brackets. So brackets just means something like that. That's what you want to end up with, okay? So 2x times what number will give me 2xy? 2x times y will give me 2xy. Then I look at, okay, 2x times what number will give me negative 8xz? Take it step by step. 2 times what will give me negative 8? 2 times 4 will give me 8, but if I want a negative, I've got to get a negative in there. So 2x times negative 4 gives me negative 8x, but I also need a z. So I'm just going to put a z in there. And then that's done. That's the first pair factorized. Let's look over here. Just the same thing, right? Look at your normal numbers. So what's our highest common factor of 3 and 12? Well, 3 actually goes into 12, so that's nice. Let's put a plus down, 3. Then look at your variables. W is common, pull that out the front. Y and Z are not common, so they're going to have to go in the brackets. Then 3W times what gives me 3WY? Well, just need a Y in there, right? You can see that expands to 3WY. And then looking at our next bit, 3W times what will give me negative 12WZ? 3 times what will give me 12? 3 times 4, but we need that negative in there. So make it that. And we need the Z, right? To make it WZ. Okay. Now we are nearly done, but not quite. In the last video, I went through this, so I'd really recommend you go through factorizing part 4a. Now, the important thing to remember, to fully factorize this, we're doing the highest common factor again, which seems a bit weird. This term, what's the highest common factor of this term and this term? What is in common between those bits that I've circled? Can you see anything in common? There's actually, the pair of brackets is the common factor. Y take 4z is the common factor. Okay. Let me try it maybe in a different color. So that's our common factor. And then whatever's left over, put a squiggly line under that in a different color. And that's going to go into the second pair of brackets, right? So I think I just changed color. 2x plus 3w. So we've got the highest common factor at the front in pink, and then the factorized bit is whatever's left over. Now it takes a little bit to get used to, so don't be sad if you don't get it yet. Let's try it out with this next one. I can see that there are 4 terms. That is a key to factorize by grouping in pairs method, okay? So I've got this is a pair and this is a pair. Let's focus on, we know how to factorize expressions with 2 terms. We know that little thing, so let's try it. What's the highest common factor of these first two terms? Okay, well, what's the highest common factor of 4 and 12? Well, they're both even, so I initially think 2, but 4 is actually a factor of 12. So 4 is a common factor at the front. Then look at your variables. What's the highest common factor of the x's? Well, x. Just take the one with the lowest power. And then there's nothing else in common between the two terms, right? So we can start putting it into that pair of brackets. 4x times what gives me 4x squared? Well, 4 times 1 is 4. X times x is x squared. Then we need to work out the second number. So 4x, sorry, times what gives me 12xy? 4 times 3 gives me 12. X times 1 is x. Don't need to put in another one. And we need a y in there. So I'll put y. Looks nice. Now I'm just going to get rid of these lines so it doesn't get too busy like the last one. Now let's factorize our other pair. What's the highest common factor between these two? I can see they're both negative, okay? Sorry. So I'm going to pull a negative out the front. Make my life simpler. And I can see that 3 is actually a factor of 9. 3 is the highest common factor here. And of the variables, it doesn't have any variables in common, sadly. So we can start factorizing. Negative 3 times what gives me negative 3x? Well, I just need to incorporate an x in there. Negative 3 times what gives me negative 9y? Negative 3 times positive 3 gives me negative 9. And then we need to incorporate a y. And our next step. Any ideas? Okay, we want to end up with something like that in order to fully factorize it, okay? We want to end up with 2 pairs of brackets when there's 4 terms like this. So I'm looking at this and I can see, okay, what's my common factor between those 2 terms? What's common between this and this? X plus 3y is actually common. Let's do it in pink again. This is the common factor that you're pulling out the front. X plus 3y. A pair of brackets is the common factor. I know I'm sounding like a broken record. Now, let's do this in. So then you just do a squiggly line under whatever is left over, taking that sign out the front. 4x take 3. And you factorize by grouping in pairs. Now, it does take some getting used to. Let's try it. Let's try these few. Okay. Factorize by grouping in pairs. There's 4 terms. Group them in pairs. Common factor of the first 2 terms, well, that's x. X times x gives me x squared. X times c gives me cx. Our next pair of brackets, well, they're both negative, so I'm going to pull a negative out the front. And they actually don't have anything in common except for negative 1, right? So I could put negative 1 and then I'm ready to factorize. Negative 1 times what gives me negative x? Well, negative 1 times x. Negative 1 times what will give me negative c? Well, times plus c. And this is good because our pair of brackets have each of the same thing in them. So the pair of brackets is the common factor. I'm going to pull that out the front as the common factor. And then I'm going to do squiggly line with whatever's left over. X take 1. Done. Last question of the day. I can see there's 4 terms here, so I realize it's factorized by grouping in pairs. The first term, what's the highest common factor? Well, x is the only thing that's in common, right? Choose the one with the lowest power. X times what gives me x squared? X times x. x times what gives me negative bx, x times negative b. Let's factorize this second pair. What's the common factor between negative x and b? Well, I think that all we can do is, what could it be? I think, well, actually at this point, I don't know. My brain is turned off. So I know that with grouping in pairs, my goal is to get the same thing in each pair of brackets, as you've seen with the last few questions. So I'm going to force the negative pairs on this, the factorizing in pairs on this. I'm going to assume that the brackets is x take b, and let's pull out a factor out the front. So what should go out the front? X times what gives me negative x? Well, it should be negative 1. And then, yes, negative 1 times negative b does give me positive b. So sometimes you can just make the other pair of brackets so that it's the same and then sort of factorize backwards. Hopefully that makes sense. Then we realize, okay, what's the common factor between these two terms? The common factor is the pair of brackets. So let's chuck it out the front. X take b, and then whatever's left over is going to be that. That is the factorized form. So I hope that made sense. In the next video, we are going to look at a basic method of sketching a parabola. And then that will cover all of year 9 quadratic skills. So I will see you then.